Hi, everyone. On behalf of the Southeast New England Program Network, welcome to our webinar titled Stormwater Financing 101, brought to you by the University of North Carolina Environmental Finance Center. My name is Leah Soloway from the New England Environmental Finance Center, and I'll be assisting with logistics for today's program along with Tess Clark from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. For those of you who haven't heard of the SNEP Network, the SNEP Network's mission is to empower local communities to achieve healthy watersheds, sustainable financing, and long-term climate resilience through the management of stormwater and restoration projects. The network focuses on building local capacity by providing no-cost trainings, webinars, and technical assistance to communities in the SNEP region. If you would like to learn more, please visit our website, snepnetwork.org. And before we begin the webinar, there are a few logistics to keep in mind. First, everyone will be on mute to ensure audio quality. There will be a Q&A and opportunity to ask questions at the end of the webinar. You'll be able to ask questions by typing them into the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We look forward to answering questions, so please type your questions in at any time. Additionally, you'll be able to request a certificate of attendance for joining this webinar. Information on how to do so will be available in our follow-up email. We also have closed captions available for today's webinar. To view the closed captions, please click the link that I will put in the chat. And on that note, I'd like to hand things over to Anna Patterson, Project Director at the University of North Carolina Environmental Finance Center, who will kick off today's presentation. And I'll hand things over to you, Anna.
Hi, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great.
All right. Well, thanks. I'm Anna Patterson, and I'm a project director at the EFC at the University of North Carolina. So just to give you a brief background, let's see, am I advancing my slides? I'm sorry. I'm trying to, but it's not advancing.
No, we're not seeing them advance. Why don't you go ahead and just make sure that you've clicked your PowerPoint and you're no longer, and you're clicked your PowerPoint app.
Sorry about that.
And now it has, it looks like it's showing us 3 of your screens. Yeah, there we go. Try now.
Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties.
Try right-clicking on the, yeah, and then click, see if it lets you click next that way. Okay, now try just clicking.
There we go.
There you go, yep.
Okay. All right. Well, so today we're going to be talking about stormwater management and specifically how to pay with stormwater fees. So how does a municipality pay for stormwater services if it does not have a utility? So here we're kind of talking about the general fund versus the stormwater utility. Now you're going to have regulation that requires some actions. You know, whether that's coming from an MS4 permit or local regulations. Perhaps you've got you know, just maintenance, but it doesn't identify a revenue source. So if you don't have a utility, chances are that revenue source is going to be your general fund. So stormwater utilities provide a dedicated source of revenue for stormwater spending, and stormwater utility fees can be more proactive. You know, with that dedicated source of funds, you're able to, you know, you're able to know what you've got and to plan for the future based on that income. Whereas general funds are more reactive, so you're kind of spending for maintenance and repairs as they happen. Now, how does the municipality pay for stormwater services if it does have a utility? It still requires a variety of sources. Many utilities have not raised their fees in a substantial way for several years. We know now with today's inflation, things are not priced the way that they were perhaps when some utilities set their fees, which means that maybe a higher percentage needs to come from some external revenue. But plan to have some consistency in funding with the fee, but it's not the end all of what you need. So you may need to take on some sort of debt service, whether it's revenue bonds, state revolving fund dollars, or EIB and green bonds. So what are some of the drivers for setting up a stormwater utility? Why go to the trouble? Well, you may have an influx of state and federal funding to invest in stormwater projects, which need to be maintained. And we're seeing that now with the money that's coming from the federal government with the bipartisan infrastructure law. There's a lot of money being pumped into our water infrastructure, and the upgrades that are done need to be maintained. And so having a set source of funding for that maintenance could be a good idea. You may also have increasing flooding issues that you need to pay for with climate change and rising sea levels, increasing hurricane strength. I guess you see less of those in New England, but who knows what we'll get in the future. You may have flooding issues that you need to routinely kind of plan for. Emerging contaminants or other worsening water quality challenges. These are also items that need to be addressed and paid for. And then of course growth. We've got a lot of migration going on through COVID. Maybe your community has grown quite a lot, which that's a good thing in a lot of cases, but it can put strain on your stormwater system. And so with that additional strain, the development may need to pay for the runoff that they're producing. So what are some of the regulatory drivers that affect how much you need for a stormwater budget? So maybe you've decided that a stormwater fee is something you're interested in, but what do you budget? A good place to start is to look at the MS4 permit. Now, not everybody's got an MS4 permit, which makes a difference. So here are the maps on the right of the screen. I've only included the MS4 regulated areas for Southern New England, so you can see Rhode Island and Massachusetts, a little bit of Connecticut here. So these MS4 regulated areas, they've got specific stormwater measures and controls that need to be, routinely paid for and maintained. Alternatively, if you don't have a permit, maybe you've got less that you need to do, less that you need to pay for in terms of permitting. Nutrient management rules. If you've got specific nutrients that you're planning for, monitoring, if you're requiring new development to install certain types of BMPs, you may need to accommodate for that in your stormwater budget. And then of course, local level regulations. Whether you've got specific building setbacks, density requirements, or other impaired waters in local jurisdictions. All of these things may impact your stormwater budget that you would need to account for when setting your fee. So how much money do you need to comply with regulations? And, of course, with all things, it kind of depends. So a great place to start is to determine what you do know. So you can make estimates for your MS4 compliance. You can look at similarly situated or sized communities and estimate, look at their estimates, what they're paying for their MS4. You can pull your own audits and see what you're spending on compliance. You can also get estimates for internal staffing and external consulting firm costs. Now, of course, this is regional. The cost of your staff maybe more or less, just depending on what your cost of living is. You can estimate the costs for your BMPs and the maintenance, which you're probably already keeping track of. Maybe just collecting them on a little, in a methodical way, you would be able to compare those to see how it, may affect your budget. And then you can also look at what fees utilities across the state are charging and how much they're subsidizing with their general fund dollars. Some of you may need to look outside your state and look at other communities outside the state that may be similar. But talking with your neighbors and looking for local examples that you can follow is a great place to start. And understanding your needs is critical. So setting your fees based on your needs provides justification for fee level. So anytime you're increasing your fees or maybe establishing a new fee, you can perceive some public resistance. However, whenever you're getting together all of your information, you're getting together your audits, if you've got a capital improvement plan, maybe you don't, not everybody does, that doesn't have an established utility already. You may want to put together some sort of capital improvement plan so that you can show your community, these are the things that we need, these are the things that we have, and this is how we're going to pay for it with this fee. So once you've got that justification, public resistance can be, decreased as, as the need is justified. And likewise, you would need to do that with your board as well. If you're passing any sort of stormwater utility fee, or if you're increasing fees that already exist, your board is likely going to have to sign off on that. And again, they may also push back. But if there's a justified need, then they're going to be more likely to listen to you. Tell a story so that they can see, like, this is how our community is going to be improved from this. So just plan ahead, plan for resistance, do your homework, and back up your case with the financial data. Understanding your needs allows for capital planning, so you can, look ahead, see what you're going to need to be doing to maintain your stormwater system in, in a year or 5 years or 10 years. And just being proactive, this will help you set a fee that helps you accomplish your long-term goals. And I keep mentioning fees. We're going to talk in depth about what types of fees we can set a little bit later on in the presentation. Now you're also going to think about whether you want to do exemptions, waivers, and credits. So credits linked to costs of providing service conform with rate variation guidance. And exemptions for factors not related to stormwater costs are not allowed. So this is saying that if you're going to provide some sort of credit program, then the credits have to be for stormwater control measures on private property that directly are related to the stormwater system. So, they've got to be maintaining or reserving water on their property. It's got to impact the stormwater system beneficially, and it does not include exemptions for factors that are not related. So this, you may think about, like, somebody saying, well, we do a ton of outreach, so we should get a credit, or we're tax exempt, we should get a credit. So those are not related, and those are not instances where a credit would be allowed. So with your stormwater credits, who is the target of your credit program? Are you going to target your residential properties? That might be a large administrative burden. Maybe you're targeting your commercial properties or your industrial properties instead. Those are, oftentimes big producers of stormwater runoff. Are you incentivizing customers to utilize the credit program? If you're going to set up a program, then it's best to incentivize people to use it. It's ideal for these big stormwater producers or stormwater runoff producers to be maintaining the stormwater on their own property. And then ensuring that you have language mandating maintenance. This is going to be written into your ordinances. Mandating maintenance is key. Ensuring that customers are compliant with the existing regulations, and that credits are for projects above and beyond. So, maybe with your commercial properties, they already have to do some level of, BMP installation with, according to your regulations. Well, if they're only doing the bare minimum, then you may not want that to be caused to get a credit. They need to be going above and beyond and retaining more water than what is the bare minimum. Okay, so what are the statutory authorities for stormwater fees? Now, I've only pulled the ones for the Southern New England states, and I saw from the registration list that there's folks from all over the country. So I encourage everybody to look up their own state statutes in terms of what is permitted for stormwater fee setting. So to start with, in Massachusetts, so Part 1, Title 14, 8316, so the charge of use of sewers. So highlighted in yellow, we have in establishing quarterly or annual charges for the use of main drains and related stormwater facilities, the city, town, or district, and it does define district, may either charge a uniform fee for residential properties and a separate uniform fee for commercial properties, or it may establish an annual charge based upon a uniform unit method. But the charges shall be assessed in a fair and equitable manner. So this is saying that you can set uniform fees, which we're going to discuss later on, or setting by a uniform method, which we will also discuss later on. It's always important that your fees be fair and equitable, and this is across the board, not just for Massachusetts. Your fees need to they can't be over what is needed. You can't just it's not a tax, it's a fee. So they're paying for a service. It does go on to say that that in Massachusetts you're permitted to do the credit program, so you could set up a credit program. All legislation may not permit that, so for those of you outside of Southern New England who are interested in setting up a stormwater fee, you would want to check whether you are permitted to do credits. Okay, in Rhode Island, you're permitted to set up stormwater management districts. So in city, town councils of any city or town in the state are hereby authorized to adopt ordinances creating stormwater management districts. So you can establish a fee system and raise funds for administration and operation of the district. The fee system shall be reasonable and equitable so that each contributor to runoff in the system shall pay the extent to which runoff is contributed. So that's saying that everybody that contributes to runoff would be responsible for their for a stormwater fee for their runoff. This includes churches. It includes nonprofits that may not otherwise pay taxes. Even so, they're not exempt from paying a stormwater fee. However, in Rhode Island, the state shall be exempted from the fee system. That may not be true for other states. You would want to check. But in Rhode Island, the state is exempt. And likewise, it lays out, you know, a lot of regulations on how you can use the stormwater management districts. It does permit the credit programs in Rhode Island. But again, I encourage everybody to look up their own statutes. So what is going on the ground? In Rhode Island, I didn't see that there was any established stormwater utilities, but I did see that Bristol, Rhode Island has established, or they did a stormwater feasibility assessment in 2016. So this would be one of the first steps that anybody that was interested in setting up a stormwater utility would want to take, to start with an initial feasibility study that might be internal, and then phase 2 on the chart, a public feasibility study, which that's what this is. So they contracted a feasibility study in 2016, and that study found that $117 per single family residence would be needed to fund their stormwater management program. They based that on equivalent residential unit. That'll be discussed later on in the presentation. It also found that non-single family residences would need to pay more based on impervious lot area. So that would be your commercial properties, you know, industrial, based on impervious lot area. It also provided a draft implementation plan. So when they do, if they decide that they want to implement this plan and get their stormwater utility up and running, they've got a draft plan. So phase 2 on the chart here would be to set the cost and rates. Now, a lot has happened since 2016, so they may need to reevaluate whether $117 is enough. Presently, it may not be. It may be, though. And then phase 3, billing and implementation. Figuring out how you want to bill. Do you want to link into the, you know, the tax assessor's GIS data? That may omit entities that don't pay taxes, so your churches, your nonprofits, maybe state and federal agencies. You can also bill through the water department. That may be a little bit more cumbersome if they are not involved in the GIS database, which a lot are not. It would just depend on what is right for your community. Now, another community that has a stormwater utility in southern New England, Fall River, Massachusetts. So this is a mill town on Mount Hope Bay with early sewer systems from the mid-1800s. They've got approximately 260 miles of pipe, and 85% of that is combined. And up until 1948, stormwater was diverted directly into the bay. And 48 is when their first wastewater treatment plant was commissioned. And they've had, you know, upgrades since then. But as a lot of communities do, they've dealt with combined sewer overflows. So in 1992, they're brought under a federal court order to address those CSOs. $200 million has been spent to address that issue. And funding included sources from federal grants, the state revolving funds for Massachusetts, and water rate increases. And then additionally, they set up a stormwater fee in 2008. And the funds for that provided a stable funding source to pay for the cost of the city's stormwater management and the combined sewer overflow abatement program. So the current rate, as of a week or so ago when I looked this up, was $47 per quarter per 2,800 square feet of impermeable surface. And that was found on their website. So as I mentioned earlier, a stormwater fee is not, an end-all be-all to the financing issues. They're still dealing with the CSOs in 2021. Just a few months ago, they entered into a 5-year agreement with EPA to fix wastewater infrastructure and reduce the CSOs. So this is going to include stormwater and sewer pipe separation, CSO storage facilities, and infiltration and inflow reduction projects. It'll cost about $20 million per year for 5 years. And that stormwater fee that they've established has provided a steady source of financing this project, though it may require other funds as well. Okay, so where do those other funds come from? Well, they come from a variety of places, and I'm only going to list a couple at a very high level. But whether you have or do not have a stormwater utility, you may be looking for federal funding sources. And a good place to start is the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's passed recently, and this is very high level. If anybody would like more information on this, we're happy to give you that after the webinar. But it increased funds to the state revolving funds over the next 5 years. These are going to be specific to your state, and there's different amounts set for wastewater, water, and stormwater. And then an increased focus on these grants is going to disadvantaged communities through the state revolving funds. And this is high level. So the takeaway here on the bottom left-hand corner, $11.7 billion are being channeled through the Clean Water State revolving funds for wastewater, stormwater, and non-point source infrastructure projects. The large majority of that's going to wastewater projects, but there's still a lot of money being channeled to stormwater. And additionally, there's money for regional waters, $25 million for carbon sequestration programs, and a lot of these funds are they're accessible now through your state revolving funds. A second large act, the Inflation Reduction Act. So this was only passed a couple of weeks ago. So just to touch on it high level, one of the sections in this act is for farmers, forest land owners, and resilient rural communities. Investments to make sure that rural communities are included in the climate solution. It's going to be providing $5 billion in grants for healthy and fire resilient forests, forest conservation, and urban tree planting. So the urban tree planting, that's a green infrastructure. Green infrastructure can help your stormwater system. $2.6 billion in grants to conserve and restore coastal habitats. That might be very relevant to some of you folks from Southern New England. And to provide communities that depend on those habitats, protect communities. It also invests in communities and environmental justice. $1.5 billion to plant trees, establish community and urban forests, and expand green spaces. $50 million for urban parks, and $550 million for planning, design, and construction of EJ community water supply projects. We're going to be writing a blog post on the Inflation Reduction Act in the next few weeks, so you can be on the lookout for that for a little bit more information. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Evan Kirk, who is going to discuss stormwater utility rate settings.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I've been working with North Carolina stormwater utilities on rate setting for the past 3 years or so. And in the process, I've developed sort of an activity that I've done in person with folks and virtually over in a webinar setting to help folks see the methodology and set in rates for stormwater utilities, and help see how the decisions that you might make in the future in setting the stormwater utility rate might impact different customer groups. So if you want to go to the next slide, I use a example utility or example community called Waterdale, Rhode Island. I can't see the next slide.
Yeah,
I'm
having the same trouble again.
All right, let me try to share my screen and we should be okay.
Or just, yep. You just need to make sure you click back on the PowerPoint once you toggle over to the control panel.
Okay.
So are you sharing your screen still, or do you want me? Oh, I see it now. Okay. Oh no, do I? Yeah, you're on the right slide. Waterdale, Rhode Island. Okay. So Waterdale, Rhode Island is a typical medium-sized town in southern New England, and they are evaluating a proposed stormwater fee structure. And it's worth pointing out that they would be the first in Rhode Island that I know about that has a stormwater utility, but they wouldn't be the first in Southeast New England. So they have examples to go off of in Massachusetts. As Anna pointed out, Fall River is a good example of a stormwater utility in Massachusetts. The finance director is rightfully concerned about equitable revenue generation in Waterdale. So we're going to look at how different fee structure designs could impact Waterdale, Rhode Island residents. You can go to the next slide. So let's keep in mind kind of some of the numbers that we might need to use in this presentation. So we have a monthly target of $170,000 in stormwater revenues, and that's to cover a lot of the costs that Anna mentioned earlier. So regulatory compliance, maintenance of our existing stormwater infrastructure, our staff time, any equipment that we need to have. A lot of times stormwater utilities will partner with other departments within the local jurisdiction. So that would be maybe paying for a little bit of public works time to do some maintenance on some of our infrastructure, to potentially maintain the vegetation within some of our stormwater control measures. If any of your leadership and your higher level staff spend time on the stormwater utility, so let's say your finance director, you might be billing 10% of the salary for the finance director to the stormwater utility fund. These are all things that we incorporate into the monthly target for revenue. And so that might look like a pretty large number. That stormwater is expensive. And so that's why we have this dedicated source of revenue potentially that we're trying to develop in Waterdale, and other towns in Rhode Island and Southeast New England might want to achieve that. There are 38,900 total parcels in the jurisdiction. The majority of those are residential, and that becomes important later on as we talk about equitability of the fee. And then there's about 10,000 that are non-residential. The total impervious surface area, let's just say pie in the sky, perfect world, we know exactly how much impervious surface area is in the jurisdiction. I'll talk a little bit about methodology for actually figuring out what your impervious surface area is. But there's 281 million in the jurisdiction, and we can see that actually the majority of that is non-residential. So the majority of parcels are residential, but the majority of impervious surface area is non-residential. So that, again, that becomes important later on in the presentation, and I'll get into why that's important. So you can go to the next slide. So we use these examples in our water and wastewater trainings, and I've started to use them in our stormwater trainings because I want to look at the impact that a stormwater utility fee has on customers, because these are the revenue generation. These are your customers. These are the folks who are receiving a service from your stormwater utility because of the residents of your jurisdiction. The ongoing assumption for stormwater utility fee setting is that the service that a customer receives is proportional to the amount of impervious surface area on their parcel. So for potentially a smaller individual, maybe living in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath or what have you, maybe there's only 1,000 square feet of impervious. That might be a little bit low, but that's okay. This is just an example. For a small home, there's 3,000 square foot of impervious. For a large home, a McMansion here, there's 10,000 square feet of impervious. And then for a cafe, there's probably about 20,000, depends on if they own their parking lot or not. Maybe their street parking is actually public street parking, but if they have a parking lot, if they're in a strip mall, then they have probably close to 20,000 square feet of impervious. So we're not going to go into examples for large customers, although I will talk about the impact that they may have on your larger customers. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to go over 4 examples of fees, of fee structures. So the first one is a flat fee for all classes. This one doesn't differentiate between parcels. It doesn't differentiate between customer types. It doesn't differentiate between different impervious surface areas. It's just a flat fee per parcel, and in this case, per utility account. So how would you calculate this? So you can go to the next slide. So in order to calculate that, we need to know the monthly revenue goal, which I showed you on that first slide. And if you advance, it'll pull up the answer. So we still have the same goal of $170,000 per month. And then our total parcels, because we're not differentiating among parcel types, 38,900 total parcels. And so you just divide the monthly revenue by the total parcels to get your monthly bill per parcel. So $4.39 per parcel. And now let's look at the impact that that has on the different types of customers. So this one is the easiest one to look at because we're not actually calculating out a bill. We know that the bill is $4.39 per customer. So go ahead and advance, and let's just try to take a look at the impact of from an equitability sense for this bill. So the small home, 1,000 square feet, pays the same as the cafe, 20,000 square feet. And so in North Carolina specifically, this is a legal way to do it. I honestly don't know if this is a legal way to set a fee in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. It's not arbitrary in the sense that you're still coming to the same amount of revenues, and it's just on a parcel by parcel basis. It's one that I kind of highly discourage setting a fee this way. And the reason why is because you've got a customer with 1,000 square feet of impervious, they're paying $4.39. That bill in and of itself is not going to represent an affordability burden to the customer because it's such a small amount. But from an equitability sense, a fairness sense, the cafe has 20,000 square feet of impervious. They're contributing a lot more runoff to your MS4, to your storm sewer system, than that 1,000 square foot home. And so from a fairness and equitability sense, this is probably the most inequitable way to set a stormwater fee. So let's go to the second option. Oh, and I just wanted to make a point. So obviously this is not a picture of Rhode Island on the right. I think it's a picture of Hawaii, but you can advance and you can see that just making the point. So $4.39 for the Walmart. Go ahead and hit next as an animation. And then it's $4.39 for all these homes. From a fairness and equitability sense, it's not super fair that, keep going, there's more. From a fairness and equitability sense, there's not, it doesn't make a lot of sense that all these homes would pay the same as a Walmart. So the next way you could potentially do it is set it by customer class. And this is still a flat fee. So you're all residential customers pay the same amount, all commercial customers pay the same amount, all industrial customers pay the same amount. But this is a slightly more fair way to do it because there's a lot of variation in the commercial sector about how much impervious is on the parcel. But there's not a whole lot of variation in residential. There's a home that might have 2,000 square feet of impervious, another one that might have 10, but that's not even an order of magnitude difference in impervious surface area. But there could be, a small shop that has 10,000 square feet of impervious, and then a Walmart that has 500,000 square feet of impervious, and that's multiple orders of magnitude in difference. And so that's why we want to at least have a different customer class if we're going to set a flat fee. So how would you do this? And we're going to simplify it. We're going to just look at residential and non-residential. So if you go to the next slide, keep going. So we'd have to calculate out a multiplier to calculate out the different bills. And so the multiplier is just the ratio of your residential, of your non-residential impervious surface area to your residential impervious surface area. And so the ratio in the entire jurisdiction, there's 2.41 times more impervious surface area non-residential than there is of residential. And so we want the bill for the non-residential to be 2.41 times the bill for the residential. And so to get to the non-residential bill, we can just calculate out the residential bill. And this is a pretty complicated formula. So if you're going into the point where you're actually looking at how to set it, a stormwater fee in your jurisdiction, if you're to that point, go ahead and contact us, and we can walk through this with you. So I'll put my email in the chat, and I've walked through this with other folks too, and I've got an academic paper that I could point you to that does this, with an example being Roanoke and an example being Blacksburg, Virginia. So our residential bill is $3.23, and now we know, if you keep going, that our non-residential bill is going to be 2.41 times that, so $7, and it's cut off 70-something cents. So let's take a look at the impact on our different customer classes of setting a bill in this manner. So we know that all the residential customers are going to pay the same, and then the cafe is going to pay the non-residential rate at $7.78. So what have we gained from setting the fees like this? Well, so all the residential customers are still paying the same. They're paying a little bit less because non-residential is footing a little bit more of the bill. We've set a rate in a way that all we have to know about our parcels is whether they're residential or non-residential. We don't have to actually go and measure the impervious surface area on all the parcels. And so administratively, this is a much easier way to set a fee, and you don't have to go and hire someone to do a GIS analysis of all the impervious surface area in your jurisdiction. And you don't have to keep a database up to date when parcels get developed to see if impervious surface area changes when the development happens. And so administratively, this is a much easier way to set your fee. Equitability, we'll get to that at the end, and I'll show you actually some ratios, and we can look at it a little bit closer number-wise. So the third option is what we call a per ERU fee. So an ERU is an equivalent residential unit. An equivalent residential unit is essentially the average impervious surface area on a residential parcel in your jurisdiction. And so basically, when you're setting a fee per ERU, you're saying, okay, this parcel is X number of average residential parcels. And so you set a fee for an average residential parcel, and then each customer pays a proportion of how many residential parcels they are on average. So if a commercial parcel is 5 ERUs, that means it's saying it's 5 times the average impervious surface area on a residential parcel. And so this is just an example fee for that. If you go to the next slide, we can kind of take a look at how we calculate out an ERU. And so there are 2 ways that I've learned in my work with stormwater utilities that you can do it. The first is a comprehensive impervious surface area study. Now, this can be somewhat expensive in the sense that in order to do this, you need some pretty good data, and you need that data to be either satellite data or data from your county's tax office, where counties oftentimes will fly an airplane over the county with different spectral bands enabled on a high a sensor on a camera or a sensor. I have talked with stormwater utilities that have paid the county to add a band to that sensor. And so they've added the ability for that sensor to sense what's called the near infrared band. And that near infrared band detects radiation coming off of impervious surface area because there's a spectral difference. So the camera, the sensor, sees a difference between the impervious surface area and, say, a tree. And so we're able to see the impervious surface area through trees. And so you look at this picture on the right, well, you can see the houses, but you can't see the driveways, you can't see any patios in the back because the trees are in the way. But this near infrared band allows you to see through those trees to see the impervious surface area. Now, this can be somewhat expensive because you've got to add that spectral band to the sensor, but you only have to do it once, and then every time there's a development permit that gets approved for a parcel, then you might actually go and reassess the impervious surface area on that parcel. But you could do that in person. You don't have to do that from aerial imagery. Or you could have the developer be the onus on the developer to tell you what the impervious surface area, and you would just check it later on. The other way to do it is to do a representative sample of residential parcels in your jurisdiction, and then assume that that sample is representative of the entire residential parcel group. This is the least expensive, but then you can't set a per ERU fee for residential parcels because you don't know the impervious surface area on all the residential parcels. You only know the impervious surface area on the sample. But with the sample, you can calculate out what an ERU is, and then use that ERU to set fees for non-residential parcels. And so I've seen this done quite often in North Carolina, and it saves you a lot of time and money administratively in calculating out the impervious on all the residential parcels. So let's go to the next slide. So to calculate out the ERU, we need to know the total residential impervious area, or the sample, or the total area in the sample. And then we need to know the number of residential parcels in the jurisdiction or the sample, depending on which way you're doing it. For this one, we're doing the total jurisdiction. So there's 82.3 million, and there's 28,995 parcels. And so we've got an ERU size of about 2,800 square feet. That's pretty typical. In order to calculate out what the actual rate for ERUs is going to be, we need to know the total ERUs in the entire jurisdiction. And so that's included residential and non-residential parcels. So 281 million in the entire jurisdiction, and our ERU size is 2,800 square feet. And so we have 99,013 units, ERUs, in the jurisdiction. And so in order to calculate out the rate per ERU, we're just going to divide our residential monthly, our revenue monthly goal by the total number of ERUs. So if you go to the advance a little bit, then we can see that our rate for the ERU is $1.73. Now, in order to calculate out the bill for each customer, now you would actually have to know the impervious surface area on all of the parcels if you're doing it this way. So if you advance to the next slide, then our ERU for the little old lady is 0.35 ERU. That is 1,000 divided by 2,800. That small home is 1.05, the big home is 3.52, and the cafe is 7.04. So to calculate out the bill, we would just multiply the ERU size of the ERU rate by the number of ERUs on the parcel. And that would give you a prorated price for stormwater for that parcel. But what I found in my work in North Carolina and other states is that utilities don't charge a prorated rate quite often. What they do is they actually tier it in the sense that, yeah, they're charging quote unquote per ERU, but what they're really doing is charging a tier rate where the ERU is the tier size. And so if you have between 0.01 and 0.99 ERU on your parcel, you pay for one total ERU. So they round you up to the next ERU. So for the little old lady, she would pay for one whole ERU because she would be rounded up. That small home would be rounded up to 2 ERU. The big home would be rounded up to 4, and the cafe would be rounded up to 8. And so that's why it says or, and then a larger bill number below it. You would take that into account when you're setting the ERU rate, because now you're actually getting more revenue than you were predicting. So this would be part of the calculation if you were calculating out your ERU rate. Equitability wise, this is what I would consider to be perfectly equitable, because every single customer is paying for the amount of stormwater that they're contributing to the stormwater collection system. I have heard a couple of jurisdictions talk about the fact that residential parcels are more expensive to service with stormwater infrastructure than commercial parcels, because of the fact that there's more surface area to the public streets per area of impervious on residential parcels, because there's more streets that connect neighborhoods, there's more connectivity to the public streets. So there's a little bit more infrastructure per parcel for residential customers. That might not necessarily be the case for your jurisdiction, depending on the size of your lots. The bigger the lots, a 5-acre lot is going to have less surface area to the street than, a 1/4-acre lot. So the more urban you are, the more that might be true. Go to the next slide. So now let's look at kind of a hybrid of two of these different methods. So let's say we're just going to set a flat fee for residential, and we're actually going to set a per ERU fee for non-residential. And the reason why this could be a valid strategy is because I kind of mentioned earlier, there's not a whole lot of variation in the size of the impervious surface area on residential parcels. You know, it's within an order of magnitude of all each other. So, you know, it might be your biggest parcel might be a larger home at 10,000, your smallest might be 2,000 or 1,500. But the difference in that, you know, is only, you know, times 9 or times 10. But for your non-residential customers, the difference could be times 200 or times 300. You know, if you have a warehouse, an Amazon distribution center, or a Walmart, then those are really large impervious surface areas, and you want to make sure that they're paying for what they're receiving in service. Go to the next slide. So to calculate out a flat fee, we have a rate, which we're going to basically, it's going to be our ERU rate. And then so that's our residential bill. Our residential bill is our ERU rate. And then our non-residential bill is the total number of ERUs on each individual parcel times our rate. So let's say there's 1,000 ERUs at your Walmart because it's, you know, 230,000 or 280,000 square feet of impervious. They got a really large parking lot. They would pay 1,000 times $1.73, so their bill would be, you know, about $1,700 a month for impervious, and that's pretty typical for a large big box store like that. And now you can see why we'd want to charge them a uniform rate, because we don't want that Walmart paying $5 if Granny Smith is paying $5. So if you go and if you advance ahead, so now let's take a look at how that looks. So we know that for all the houses, they're going to pay the same. So $1.73 across the board for residential. For the cafe, they're going to pay that number of ERUs times the rate. So they either pay $12.18, or if we're tiering it in the sense that we're going to round up to the next ERU, they would pay $13.84. So let's talk about equitability from a number standpoint. So we know that residential parcels were the majority of parcels in the jurisdiction, but they did not represent the majority of impervious surface area. So even though you have more residential parcels, the majority of your costs associated with your MS4, with your storm collection system, would be associated with your non-residential customers, because that's the vast majority of your impervious surface area. So let's take a look at the revenue paid by each customer class for each one of these billing structures. So for flat for all customers, residential customers pay about 75% of the revenues, non-residential pay about 25%. But look, residential customers are only 29% of the impervious, so they're paying more than double what they would otherwise, you know, be equitably expected to pay if we can go with the assumption that impervious surface area is proportional to the service that they're receiving. If we do the flat fee by customer class, it only gets a little bit more equitable, not a whole lot more equitable, right? The per ERU is perfectly equitable, and then the flat rate, what are we gaining with that flat rate for residential customers? Well, we're gaining the fact that we don't have to measure the impervious surface area on all the residential customer parcels. So we've got a much lower administrative cost. What are we sacrificing? Well, we're only sacrificing less than 1% in equitability on this. So they're paying 30.1% of the revenues. They represent 29.3% of the impervious surface area. So residential is only barely subsidizing the non-residential customers when it comes to impervious surface area. And I already talked about the fact that residential customers, it might be a little bit more expensive on average to service them because of the surface area of the parcel. So that might be a way to kind of, you know, get at that equitability question. But amongst customers, you might have customers complaining about, you know, I'm a small home and I pay the same as that large home down the street. Across the entire class, it's equitable. Among customers, you might experience some pushback, but you could bring this data to them and bring the fact that, hey, you know, we're actually saving money in our stormwater enterprise fund by not calculating out the stormwater bill, and because of that, your stormwater bill is a little bit lower by not calculating out the impervious surface area on all the residential customers. So that can get pretty expensive. You know, I've seen estimates of that impervious surface area survey being $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 in North Carolina. and then you've got to keep that database up to date. So I think that's all I had in my portion of the presentation. Certainly, so when you're actually going to set your revenues, so what should you take into account? You should be setting your revenue target first. So knowing what are your estimates for regulatory compliance? What are your estimates for staff? And then work backwards to the fee. Don't do it the other way around. Don't say, okay, we're going to charge $5 and then let's work to see what it's going to give us in revenues. No, please go ahead and set the revenue target first and then set your fee to achieve that revenue target. That way you don't experience a revenue shortfall inadvertently. And then you can decide on the rate structure based off of stakeholder input. So I would highly encourage that if you're going to set a stormwater utility fee, that you're going to have some sort of stakeholder engagement and maybe a public meeting. And it may even be required statutorily for you to have a hearing as part of your budget hearing. And then please reevaluate this regularly if you go ahead and set a fee in the future. So revenue expenses that you're going to be seeing in the first year or so. These are North Carolina specific estimates, but they're not going to vary a whole lot within the entire East Coast. A rate study, I'd actually think it's going to be a little bit more expensive based off of data that I've gathered recently. So I have seen people do rate studies in-house, but if you're going to hire a consultant, I think you're looking at closer to $60,000 for that. Staffing, you've got to potentially have a stormwater director or a person who's full-time on the stormwater staff. You're going to be paying some salaries of other folk, potentially in public works. All the other stuff, all the other costs and expenses that are associated with other departments, billing, supplies, training, etc. You might be paying for equipment like a street sweeper or backhoe or lawnmowers, or you might be sharing that equipment with other departments. As part of your MS4 permit, if you have one, you probably had to map your MS4. And so that comes with a cost. That's only a one-time cost, though you do have to keep it up to date. And then depending on the level of service that your customers demand, you may have capital needs. And the reason why I didn't put a figure is because that varies greatly. And then the maintenance varies pretty heavily depending on how much MS4 you have and if you have any stormwater infrastructure in addition to that. These aren't going to be super relevant to you all, but here's an example. The current slide we're on is an example of equipment sharing across departments. So this stormwater utility pays the debt service for 100% of the leaf vacuum, but they're only paying partial debt service on everything else because other departments are using those stormwater infrastructure items. So the backhoe, 40% they pay the debt service. Other departments are using 60% of that backhoe's time. So you can get with other departments, and if you have got infrastructure that you need to fund for the stormwater utility fund, you might be able to share it with other departments. And then you want to make sure that you're being conservative when you're looking at capital costs, because we're seeing pretty high increases in costs related to construction labor, construction materials. You can see that the CCI, which is the construction cost index, was over 8% in 2021. Well, the CPI, this is not up to date because the CPI now is closer to 8%, but the CCI is typically in times of supply crunches and labor shortages is going to be higher than the CPI. So keep that in mind as you're going to set your revenue targets, that you want to be pretty conservative and have an inflationary aspect into your revenue targets. It looks like there's a question that came in, but I'm having difficulty seeing it because it's, can you share the link to the academic paper you referenced? I'd be happy to. Can you please send me an email directly, because it's going to take me a second to pull that up, and I put my email in the chat. It's emkirk@sog.unc.edu. If anyone's interested in getting the academic paper, you can send me an email directly, because I'll have to download a PDF with our library code at the university here. Is multifamily residential typically classed with commercial? In most cases, yes. Multifamily is classed as commercial. I see it sometimes as a separate class as well. And the only time that I really see that is if they're charging per unit. So for an apartment complex, they may say that we're assuming that apartment is 0.5 ERU, for example. And so they would pay a bill that's 0.5 ERU. But a lot of times you'll just send the bill to the property owner and you'll calculate the impervious on the property. Were those the only two questions, Tess? Because for some reason my my question, RI has excellent impervious surface data. So Rhode Island has excellent impervious surface data derived from 2020 ortho photos, and 38 of 39 municipalities have good parcel data. But the data in hand calculating an ERU and determining the ERU multiplier on large non-residential parcels is almost trivial in GIS. Well, that's excellent news. Whoever asked that question, if you want to send me an email, if you could, just pointing me to that so I can point others to it if they ask for it.
Awesome. Evan, I think you made it through the bulk of those questions. We did have a few that were more general in nature, and we sent out responses to those. Particularly, make sure if you'd like a copy of this presentation to go and download it now under the handout section. And if you don't happen to see that, then you can let us know and we'll get a copy to you. Evan and Anna, do you have any closing comments today?
I always just like to thank folks for attending, and thank you to my colleague Anna. Anna's leading this project at our center, and she had me on here today. So obviously I'll give Anna a chance to say something as well.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for coming. If anybody does need or want any technical assistance with setting your stormwater rate, please do reach out to us and we'll be happy to help.
Fantastic. Well, it's 12:01, so we are all set to go. If you do have questions, please get in touch. And thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you hopefully at another webinar this fall. Bye-bye.